Welcome to the Financial Pathway Podcast. We're here to help you go to the next level in your finances with practical advice from speaker and financial planner Nate Skelly.
Well, here we go. It is time for Trump 2.0. And while there are plenty of issues to discuss today, we are only going to focus on what a second Trump term could mean for your wallet and for the American economy. It's interesting because we've already seen the market respond pretty positively in the few days since it was clear that Donald Trump would win. The stock market jumped up a bit. The U.S. Treasury 10-year rate jumped to its highest level, and the dollar rose to the strongest level it's been at in a year. So generally, this is because the market anticipates that the Trump presidency will likely mean lower taxes, less regulation, and so it's responded pretty positively so far. But market movements are simply anticipations of what might happen next. What will actually happen next is, of course, another question altogether. So what I want to do today is just take a few minutes and let's break down some specifics. Remember, as a financial planner, I'm going to do my best to keep my opinions out of it and just stick with what we know. You know, people don't hire me to be a political commentator, even though sometimes I would like to be, but politics both exasperates and intrigues me. A few weeks ago, I did an episode 149 on the podcast, How Will Donald Trump's Policies Impact the Economy? And I outlined what might happen if Trump gets elected. And I also did one for Kamala Harris. And a lot of things that I said in that episode, I put in the caveat that if this candidate wins the presidency, their policy plans could be held up if their party does not also win the House and the Senate. Because if you have a Democrat president, but a Republican majority in the House, not much is going to get done. Well, now that the dust is settled, we see that not only did Donald Trump win the presidency, but Republicans will also control the House and the Senate, which means that at least for the next 2 years, they have the ability to pass much, if not all, of Trump's agenda. So we're going to look at some of his stated policy positions. We're going to walk through really 3 items that I think are going to be most likely to affect your bottom line over the next 4 years. And I want to start with taxes. And this is a really loaded subject and a lot to cover here. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, more widely known as just simply the Trump tax cuts, they are set to expire at the end of 2025. Remember, when Donald Trump became president the first time, Republicans had the majority and they passed sweeping tax regulation reform, but it was only an 8-year window. And now Trump has said he would like to extend those. And now, of course, that the Republicans have the majority, it seems likely that that will be the case. So over the next few years, that means that we would probably see these lower tax rates that we're at right now continue into the future. But there was a lot wrapped up into those Trump tax cuts other than just lowering the federal income tax rates. Estate tax limits were doubled. It used to be around $6 million. Now it's north of $12 million. The amount of your assets at death that are protected from estate tax. And so that means for wealthier Americans, it means more of their assets protected from going to Uncle Sam at their death. One of the other big changes from the Trump tax cuts is that it limited what they call the SALT deductions, SALT. It stands for state and local taxes. So it used to be the case that you could deduct your state and local taxes from your federal tax return. The idea being, oh, you already pay taxes to your state and to your local government, so we can deduct that from your income on your federal tax return so you're not paying taxes on that money twice. But of course, that really helped high income individuals, people who were already paying a lot in state and local taxes. Part of the Trump tax cuts, in order to make the numbers work and the budget balance, they introduced a $10,000 limit to that deduction. So you could only take $10,000 SALT deduction, nothing more than that. Trump has talked about potentially bringing that back and uncapping that deduction, and that would help high-income taxpayers. But the vast majority of people don't have more than $10,000 in state and local taxes that they pay. So for most people, that's not going to affect them. But certainly for those that have higher income, that would be a welcome addition back to the tax code. So we'll see if that takes place. Another big change, kind of extending on the Trump tax cuts, is that Trump says he would like to take the corporate tax rate even lower than previously. A few years ago, the corporate tax rate was at 35%, one of the highest in the world. When Trump became president and Republicans had the majority, they lowered it all the way down to 21%. Now they may drop it even lower. This would certainly be a big boon to U.S. corporations. The less in taxes would lead to higher profits and likely higher stock prices and likely more expansion and even more hiring. So on that front could be very good news. It would also bring our corporate tax rate down to one of the lowest in the world. Now, the downside of this is, of course, is that we are already spending way more than we bring in tax revenue. And so saying, hey, my plan is to actually bring in even less in tax revenue, that's going to increase the deficit. That's going to widen the gap between what we take in and how much we spend. So if we're not going to push ourselves further into debt, we need to find ways to also reduce spending at the same time. And Trump has talked about creating a team of advisors tasked with that very job, rooting out government inefficiency, finding wasteful spending and reducing it. And that effort may be led by none other than Elon Musk, who campaigned with Trump in the last couple of months of the race. So we'll see what happens on that front. I will say this, Republicans, for all of their talk about reducing government spending and balancing the budget, have not done a very good job. And Democrats certainly have not done a good job either, but it's been both, even though Republicans talk about it a lot more. The last time we had a balanced budget and actually had a surplus was back in the 1990s. Really, since 2000, we have just continued to operate on a huge deficit and keep adding to the debt every single year. And even in Trump's first term, government spending continued to grow. And that was even before COVID came along. So really, for all of our sakes, I really do hope that the Trump administration will make actual headway in bringing down wasteful spending, reducing the deficit, and getting us back in line where we need to be. Another provision on the tax side of things is the child tax credit. So one of the Trump tax cut provisions was it bumped up the child tax credit from $1,000 per eligible child to $2,000. And that, of course, helped a lot of American families on the tax side of things because credits directly offset any taxes owed, but they are also fully refundable. So if you end up the year owing, let's say, $10,000 in federal taxes, but you have 3 eligible children, that's $6,000 child tax credit to you. So you would only now pay $4,000 because that credit offsets taxes owed. But what happens if you only owed $2,000 in taxes, but you also have 3 eligible kids for a $6,000 credit? The government will actually pay you $4,000. It's not just, oh, it zeroes out, now you don't owe us anything. They will pay you the difference. Well, when the Trump tax cuts were set to expire, the child tax credit was supposed to go back down to $1,000, but now I see that very, very likely to stay at $2,000 per child. So all families rejoice that the child tax credit is going to stay at $2,000 per child, very, very likely. Also, let's touch on a couple of tax exemptions. This is interesting. This is new territory for us. These are things that we've actually not seen as far as a real headway on policy. Trump has said he would like to do away with the taxation of Social Security benefits. And personally, I hope that is something that that people on both sides of the aisle could get behind. It does seem quite ironic that we get taxed on the money that we paid to the government for years via a payroll tax, and now we're getting taxed on it now that we're receiving that money. That would certainly be a nice boost as well to many who are in retirement and who rely heavily on Social Security for their income. So we'll see what happens with that. But another thing that Trump has said he would like to do away with taxes on, at least federal income taxes, is tips and overtime pay. And honestly, on this one, I don't really think that this is a good idea. I'm for low taxes, but this feels like, I would say, an unnecessary complication because it really is inconsistent. For example, you've got a server at the restaurant who's paid almost entirely through tips, but there's other workers who get hourly wages. So the server now, because tips are not subject to taxes, pays no taxes, but the busboy and the cook and the hostess, they do pay taxes. That seems unfair and not really consistent across the board because, of course, the idea here is we want to help people who are low and middle income, and that's most of the people who are getting tips and who are working a lot of overtime. So that's certainly, I think, a good aspiration, but I think there are better ways to accomplish that. For instance, lowering their tax rates or increasing their deductions or expanding the earned income tax credit, something that's more uniformly applied across everyone and not just some. But my other concern here with making tips and overtime not taxable is I think you would really open the door for a lot of people trying to exploit this rule for their own benefit, who it was not designed to help. I mean, can you see maybe some hedge funds or some CEOs getting clever and trying to find ways to claim some of their income as tips or restructuring their schedule so that now, all of a sudden 40% of their pay was actually overtime that they worked and not their regular salary. And so I think we got to be careful as far as that goes. But we'll see. We'll see if any headway gets made on those tax exemptions. Let's move secondly to tariffs. This has become a major part of Trump's policy platform, and I think another thing that could really affect American families' bottom line. We are losing trade and we are losing jobs to places like China and Mexico. And of course, this has been happening for quite a while because labor is cheaper there and it's hard for American manufacturing to compete. And so, in order to level the playing field, Trump has said he would like to levy a 10 to 20% tariff, maybe even higher, on goods coming into the US. And in typical Trump style, he keeps things vague enough that nobody really knows exactly what that might look like. And I'm sure that's part of his negotiating strategies, not trying to give too much away. As I said on that previous episode where we talked about Trump's policies, if tariffs are implemented, it will lead to higher prices in the short term. And this is out of necessity. This is actually by design. Because think about it. If an American manufacturer is struggling to make product A at an affordable rate, let's say that they have to charge $120 a unit in order to be profitable, just because of all of their costs and labor and regulations that exist within the US that maybe don't exist in a place like China. But you could buy the same product A from China for $100 a unit because they can make it a lot cheaper. Well, then the American manufacturer, of course, is at a huge disadvantage. And people are going to start buying the stuff from China and not from America, or at least largely, right? So what do? Well, Trump says we put a 20% tariff on that Chinese-made product. So now they have to sell it at $120 a unit because what is any company going to do? Any extra expenses that they incur, they're going to pass that along to the consumer. They're not going to say, oh, I guess we just make 20% less. No, they're going to increase the prices in order to offset that. So now, yay, American manufacturer is protected. American jobs are protected. See, everything is now at the same level and we can compete again. But who pays the price? Well, the consumer, of course. The consumer now has to pay $120 a unit. They have no cheaper alternative. So it's not like the tariff magically lets American companies sell things for cheaper. All it does is just raises the prices of the foreign goods so that now the American manufacturers can compete on price. Now, maybe over the long term, the economic benefits of a tariff policy would increase our standard of living and our income such that it really offsets the higher costs and ends up being a net benefit. But really, there's no way to get around it. There would be pain in the near term if tariffs are implemented. So we're going to see what happens, how that plays out. The other positive I will say on the tariff front is that it would help to increase government revenue. So if we're looking for ways to narrow that gap between government revenue and spending, implementing tariffs would be a way to bring in another source of revenue and get us closer to balancing the budget. And then thirdly, let's talk about the stock market. I've seen a lot of posts and memes and just sort of general conversation around, hey, Trump's back in the White House. That's going to be good for my 401k. It's going to be good for the stock market. And we've already seen that. We did see a bump here. I'm going to say something that I said when Biden became president. I'm going to say it again when Trump becomes president. I will say it when the next person becomes president, whoever that will be. Don't make the mistake of thinking that you can tell where the market is going simply based on who the president is. Yes, the market jumped when Trump won. That's a very short-term move. And proportionately, it's really actually not super significant. We saw bigger one-day market swings already earlier this year based on news that had nothing to do with the presidential election. The markets move based on news, but there's lots of news and there's lots of factors. So what I want to encourage you to do is restructure your thinking around investing to not be so tied in with politics, because really what investing is doing, especially when it comes to the stock market, is you are investing in the best companies in the world. You are becoming part owner of some of these best companies. And when you buy and when you buy the best companies in the world, you are expecting them to continue to innovate, to make the goods and services that people want, and to make more money than they did before. And good companies can do this regardless of who's in the White House. So in other words, I want you to think of it like this. Do you think that Coca-Cola will still sell soda, that Amazon will still deliver packages, that Verizon will still provide phone services, that McDonald's will still sell burgers, regardless of whether a Republican or a Democrat sits in the White House? Do you think those companies will be able to continue to do what they do and do it well and make more money regardless of the political environment? I do. You want to invest in good companies for a long time and let them do their thing. And what we've seen is when you do that, it works out pretty well. The stock market has performed well under Democrats. It's performed well under Republicans. It's performed well under every combination of Democrat, Republican, President, House, Senate, etc. Now, there are a lot of things that remain to be seen. I am optimistic. about the future because I'm optimistic about America and the American system that still provides the most freedom and the most opportunity of any place in the world. But one last thing I will say on this is that the thing that's going to make the biggest difference to your financial well-being over the next 4 years is actually not going to be Donald Trump. It's you. And I would say the same thing if Harris had won. So much of our political and economic environment is out of our individual control. Yes, we vote and we make our voice heard, but we are one of millions trying to exercise that right. So we proportionately don't have a lot of control in those areas. But the most important factors to your financial well-being are in your control. You control how much you save. You control how much you spend. You control whether you take on debt and what skills you develop and the effort you put into your job and whether you start a business, or whether you move, or whether you negotiate a raise. All of those things are up to you. So as always, stay informed about our world, absolutely. But remember that financial wellness always starts with you and your money habits. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.